So thank you everybody for making it this evening, and thank you, Lindsay, for inviting me to do this talk. Um, if you were here before, then you know who I am, and Lindsay gave a very nice, very generous introduction there. Um, what I wanted to talk today about is essentially like there's a lot of skills that you can learn from different places about storyboarding, but generally what tends to be taught is the mechanical aspect of storyboarding, which is how do you how do you draw the scenes, how do you put them together, how do you do your composition, all of those things, posing and what have you. But storyboarding kind of is basically like it's not one skill, but I'll get onto that in a second. Let's start with what do we do? So you can ask a lot of board artists what they do, and you generally get a kind of a similar kind of answer. And the answer tends to be, I take a script and I break it down into images for production. And again, mechanically, that is the job. That's what you do. But it's what you are is a production problem solver. That's your job. That is your first and foremost, that's who you are. So you uncover issues in the scripts and story, you fix them before they become problems for everyone else. And animation is collaboration, so communicate with the other departments, um, so you know that what you're doing is achievable and it's within the scope, the schedule and the budget. Um, when you find yourself in a studio, one of the things you'll find very quickly is that a lot of the departments are kind of insulated from each other in a way. And it's not that you're discouraged to talk to anybody else. It's just that it just doesn't really happen. So I would always encourage people, especially new people, when you start into places, to get to know certain people. And the people you want to get to know really well, apart from your supervisor, is your coordinator. They're your best friend in the world, and then the leads from all the other teams who will be taking your work and plussing it down through a pipeline. And by talking to them, if you have any questions, they can answer things for you. If you have a scene where you want to do something, they'll be like, "Oh, don't do it that way. It'll be too much for us." But you can't really learn that without talking to these folks. So I just want to make sure that like when you get into a studio, don't be shy. Introduce yourself around and talk to everybody. And storyboarding is not one thing. It is a lot of different disciplines. And like I have listed here, like we have story structure and narrative function, layout, directing and editing, cinematography, animation, acting, drawing, and understand people. So story structure and narrative function, what I'm talking about there is like how our stories actually put together. And the narrative function part of it is understanding what different characters do and how they perform within a story and why they're there and how they can be utilized to shape the story. And as a quick example, ask anybody what antagonist and protagonist means, for instance. The general kind of answer is that the antagonist is the good guy and the protagonist is the good guy and the antagonist is the bad guy. But it's that's not really how they function in narrative. So in narrative, all antagonist and protagonist means is the character that is for is for the theme of the story, and the antagonist is the character who is against that theme. Or they can both be for the same theme, but they're coming at it from different directions, and that's all it really means. They don't have to be bad people, for instance. They can be like a uh, happily engaged couple, and one of them has a point of view on something. The other partner has a different view on it, and that's all antagonist and protagonist means. But that narrative function is important to know because you can have an antagonist and a protagonist on the same side. You can have the antagonist who is the bad guy, but you can also have a character who is kind of, the voice, kind of like a voice for reason, who tempers your antagonist, or sorry, your protagonist. by showing them what the other side is, so then they can then see the bad guy's point of view maybe, and that's how you kind of present it to the audience as well. Layout is, how you pose your characters, how you get them in the scene. Um, Directing and editing are probably the two biggest skills that you develop as a storyboard artist. You have to know how to direct and you have to know how to edit. Editing starts with self-editing. So I'll get into this a little bit later on, but when you're doing your boards, you pretty much want to, you are the first director that sees, apart from the supervisor, the first person to actually start working on the script is going to be you, and you are the first director and you're the first editor of the work. So learning how to do those and getting comfortable with it is very important. Cinematography, you're in charge of where the camera goes. You're in charge of what the camera sees and what the audience sees, and you're in charge of how you're kind of led through the story, as you're drawing it. Understanding animation principles is very important, um, and understanding the the medium that you're actually working in and what you can do safely and what might cause problems in production. Again, production problem solver, something that you would do in 3D, there's no way you're going to do it in a 2D show, and vice versa. Um, Act. You need to be an actor. You need to be able to look at your script, take your dialogue, and act it out. If your boards are flat, there's a good chances that you're just not acting. So it's cheesy, but I say to people, if in doubt, act it out. Get up on your feet, literally get out of your chair, stand up, and act it out. And be aware of the character and who the character is, and listening to the nap pause, the dialogue, what kind of inflections are in there can kind of help you eke out that character and give you ideas about how they act. Again, you're going to be the first person to kind of be doing this in the pipeline. So giving the animators a good starting point is great. So acting is important. So when you're watching film, really watch what the actors are doing. It can be good training. Drawing is quite far down the line because I think John Pomeroy said it about animating is like you don't have to be a great draftsperson to be an animator. You just have to know how to draw forms well. And for storyboarding is like, you know, if your perspective is, generally pretty good and you can draw things relatively well, uh, you can present a pretty darn good story as long as you understand how your story is structured and what the narrative functions of your characters are and all the other things I've just mentioned. The drawing is kind of almost a secondary thing to it, really. Even though it's the most kind of obvious part of the job, it's actually quite far down the line in my thinking. And then just understand people, and that's just watch everybody. Because when you're boarding, you're gonna come across pieces of dialogue, whatever, where you're gonna be like, I know somebody like that. And being able to kind of pull from that character and like that person that you know and stick them into your boards, again, more about acting as well. So just be aware that it is all of these things. It's not just one thing. You're also the gaffer. You also are in control of the lighting and the mood. So when you want to create a mood, that's kind of up to you too. Um, so the day-to-day of being a board artist is you read between the lines and maybe cut a few. So this is not something you want to do without your supervisors, without your supervisor knowing. But when you're going through your script, you're going to be reading, you're going to see a scene that isn't like put together particularly well, like the logic doesn't quite work. And I've seen a lot of board artists over the years who will like, you know, end up banging their head on the desk because they're trying to do exactly what the script says. And a lot of times you cannot do that. You cannot present the script in the form that it's in because the writers aren't necessarily thinking visually. They probably haven't even looked at the production artwork, so they don't even know where things are. So a character is supposed to be doing a thing, but what they're actually supposed to be doing is halfway across the room. So that's not really going to work for you. So being able to kind of get into a script and restructure is one of the skills you kind of had to get used to. And in large part, what you draw won't be on the page. So you have to read between the lines and use what's there to build out your story and your storyboard. And what I mean by that is you'll get screen direction. So that'll be somebody walks into a scene, they do a thing, you have some dialogue, they do another thing, you have some dialogue, and that's essentially what the script does. It doesn't really give you a lot of insight into who the character is or how they're supposed to be behaving in any particular kind of situation. And as the board artist, that's the stuff that you're trying to eke out of the script. So again, if your boards are flat or they're not quite reading well, that's going to be one of the main problems is that you're not doing that. And even if you wrote the script yourself, you're still probably going to have those issues if you're not looking at or thinking about what's happening in between those lines of dialogue and what's being said. Because and again, a lot of times you're going to be taking stuff, you're going to be moving it around to try and make it either have it make more sense, give it more impact. Sometimes you want to change a line of dialogue because you look at previous animatics and you're like, well, that character would never say that, so there might be just a continuity thing there. And so part of your job is calling for pickups, calling for some of the voice actors come back in, they'll just read the lines again. So you want to make sure that that you can do that. Beware thoughts. So often dialogue will be written as thoughts, and but we can show those. So if a character says something that could be conveyed visually and it's more impactful that way, then don't have them say anything. And again, talk to your supervisor, talk to whomever and say, I think we should lose this line. If we lose that line, we're going to have more impact here. Or again, call for a pickup because a different line may be more appropriate, and learn what's important. So when you learn what's important, it's this is more about kind of when you actually uh, instead of being slavishly following the script, there's a couple of things I do. I'll talk about it a little bit later on as well. But essentially, I'll read the script, read it a good few times, make my notes, and then I'll take only what I need to see, only what needs to happen, and I'll write those beats down. And then I'll put the script away, and I'll have my nat pause, my audio, and I'll listen to that and look at my beats, and I'll board to that. And then I'll look back at the script. And if I've missed something and I didn't notice when I was watching it through, then it probably wasn't important anyway. And that's what I'll go with. And when you do that enough, you start to learn what's important and what's not. Because what's important to the story, there's something might be something more important to the writer that comes through, but it's not important to the story. And your job as a board artist is to see those things and say, this will be stronger if we do it that way. And if you can make that case, then absolutely do that. So as a kind of a quick example, I have some videos that we can look at real quick, but I have this silly little piece of dialogue here. So you have character one, character two. Character one appears at the desk. Character one says, I need $20. Character two, taken by surprise, looks around, then back to see one. Is said, character two, what do you need $20 for? I'm not even sure I have $20. Can you ask someone else? Unfazed by the question, C1 presses. Character one, come on, you always have cash. You can spare 20, right? Character two, uncomfortable at the exchange. C2 reaches into their wallet. Character two, not really. I have $5. Will that do? Unimpressed that they didn't get what they want. C1 gives the beat and answers. Exasperated. Fine, give it here. So it's a very simple scene. As you can see, I'm putting a little bit of inflection on the dialogue, but if you're given this as a scene, it doesn't tell you very much. And often, especially on TV scripts, you'll get a lot of scenes that don't tell you a lot. They give you the setups and they give you the basic idea of what needs to happen between those characters, but it doesn't give you much more than that. So what you have to do is first thing is we look at the dialogue, and this will be more important to you when you're doing your own thing. When you're learning how to do this and you're kind of putting together, portfolio pieces or whatever, is to look at your dialogue and really pare it down. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring out who the character is and how they relate to each other and how the story can progress. And this kind of gives us, there's nothing necessarily wrong with this, but it's very direct, it's very on the nose kind of thing. And but it also may not be, if there was more story around this, you'd be looking at this and kind of, well, that's not really this character. Character two, they don't really behave like that. They feel like they're being bullied by character one, but they're not really like that. I think they're more, they'd be expecting it almost. And so when you start going through your script, I would pare it right down. So, and it kind of makes it a little bit easier to kind of get some character out of it. So character one appears at the desk and says, hey, character immediately is like, ask someone else. I was like, what? I got a five, take it or leave it. I was like, oh, fine, you take it. And you're in and you're out, and job's done, and you're good to go. Because one of the things that'll happen is often your dialogue will try and over explain what's happening in your scene. But you can leave that up to you. That's why we have acting. That's why we have animators as well. So when what you're trying to do is you're trying to give the animators as much information as they need to be able to take what you give them, plus it, and make it more interesting and more exciting. We learn more about the characters. I mean, here we learn, like, depending on how the lines are read, that this person might be pushy. I need $20. Like, what do you need $20 for? Again, very, it's almost naturalistic dialogue, but it's almost a bit too expository. The character is, these are, as far as I'm concerned, these are thoughts. So the character saying, what do you need $20 for? I'm not sure I even have $20. That's an internal monologue. That's not dialogue. And I need $20 is also kind of an internal monologue. That's the character's want. But we don't need to see that we don't need to hear that on screen. We just need to have the character. So if we have the character come in and just go, hey, and the other character turns around and says, ask someone else, that immediately sets us up with who these characters are. We know who they are and we know what their relationship is together. The first character saying, hey, all they have to do is say hello, and the other character's like, no, I'm not having any of it. The only time you ever talk to me is when you want money. And that's what the implication is. And we get more out of that as an audience because, you know, it's again, you have to look at this in terms of a grander story where this little scene um, is sorry, I got a little bit derailed there. Yeah, we're getting more about like the interaction with the characters and who they are and how they relate to each other with less dialogue. But the way they react to each other and how they behave is what really, makes the story and builds the story. So if you see things like that, like, just pare it back to, like, if it sounds like a thought or it feels like a thought, just get rid of it and see what happens. Even just get rid of the line completely. Like, even at the end when the character goes, oh, fine. Then maybe they don't even have to say that. All they have to do is kind of go, oh, okay. They put their hand out and they wiggle their fingers and they take the money or whatever it is. Um, and that's the kind of like because I don't have a lot of time to talk about this, I have to kind of blast through it pretty quickly. But these are the kind of the steps that I would take when I'm looking at a script as to how do I get more out of this? How does this line really have to be said? There's a lot of dialogue you'll find that is also very expository, and anime, for instance, is highly expository versus Western films, which tend to be more subtext heavy. And there's reasons for that. I'm not going to get into it, but there are reasons for that. But um, the expository dialogue doesn't give us anything extra. It doesn't give us anything new. It's just giving us information that could be better doled out over time, and we would get more out of it that way in terms of seeing the story unfold. But being just told it really doesn't help. The only time expository dialogue really works is if it's like um, is when we bring out exposition, it's usually brought out through conflict. So if there's an argument or anything like that, exposition works very well there, because you're bringing out something and that the audience needs to know about this character, and bringing it out when it comes out in an argument, it's somebody who is, like, blaming somebody for something or attacking them. So they are going to say these expository things, and that's when it works in there. But it does not work in normal dialogue. Like, who's that over there? Oh, that's, Jimmy McGee. He's the guy who did blah de blah. And you just get this big stream of like exposition, which just doesn't, it's one, it's boring to listen to, and it just doesn't give us anything. So that's, anyway, that's one of the things that I kind of go for. And where we really see this is this dialogue here. So this is from Jaws. And in this scene, there's been an attack. The shark has attacked some people at the beach. They've gone to the hospital, and Brody, Vaughn is the mayor. Brody is has had enough at this point. He has to do something about this. So he grabs Vaughn and he gets him to, sign a voucher so he can hire someone, Quint, to take care of the shark. And this is from an earlier drafted script. So Brody crossing to Vaughn, got a pen on you, Vaughn? Why? There's only one thing you're good for anymore: signing a damn voucher. Here, it's an authorization to employ a contractor. Vaughn, I don't know if I can do that without interrupting. I'm not going to hire Quint. I'm going to hire Quint to kill the fish. I want to see that shark dead. So you can see that. That is like in his head. That should not be on the page. Vaughn, maybe we can save August. Brody, forget it. This summer's had it. Next summer's had it. You're the mayor of Shark City. You wanted to keep the beaches open. What happens when the town finds out about that? Vaughn, I was acting in the town's best interests. Brody, the best interest in this town would be to see that fish belly up in the water with a hole in its head. You do the right thing. You waterize me. Indicates paper. Right here, whatever it costs. Vaughn, my kids were on that beach. Just sign it, Larry. So that was the dialogue that was written. But when we see the final scene, um, it is a lot better. Sorry, give me a second.
Best. You're going to sign this voucher.
Yeah. So you can see there the dialogue was really kind of trimmed far more to the point, and we're getting more from the characters, but that's, that's the acting. But in terms of like, if you're doing this for yourself and you're doing your own boards for a portfolio, whatever, these are the things you're going to have to look at. You're going to have to look at the dialogue. Is it too expository? What can I do with this to get more out of the characters? Vaughn is kind of muttering to himself. He's supposed to say, we can have August, but he's just like, oh, August. He's like, what are you talking about? And that's the actors kind of, reacting to each other in the moment as well. But um, this is why, as a board artist, you have to understand these things. You have to understand uh, how it's going to be when it's performed. Because sometimes you'll get dialogue that's called by the voice director that doesn't fit. It doesn't have the intent that it needs to fulfill the scene, because there might be something that they missed in it that you see as a board artist where you're like, no, that's not the right tone. We need to have the tone edged one way or the other, and that's when you call for a pickup uh, to kind of have that modified. And usually they'll record some scratch to kind of give them an idea of what it is. But like the change in intonation from, or how or the emphasis and how the dialogues delivered can have a huge uh, impact on how your scene gets presented. And in terms of like, when we start leaving things out of boards, there's two scenes again from Jaws, because Jaws, if you want to understand storytelling economy, this is the movie to watch. It is kind of flawless in that regard. They just don't waste anything. So in this scene, we're not going to watch the whole thing. We don't really have time. But the setup here is that this lady, it was her son that was killed at the beach. She knows Brody and the mayor knew, but she's taking it out on Brody. Um, so she comes up and she slaps him in the face. Directly after that scene cuts, there's a little bit of stuff at the end where kind of Brody walks away. But that scene immediately cuts to this scene. Now, you've seen enough movies to know that a movie that is not that well written, that scene would have gone. The woman comes up, slaps him, says what she has to say. He turns away, he walks away. It would either cut to a scene of him ranting and raving to somebody. And it's like, I did that. I killed that woman's son. It was all my fault. Now I've got to go do something about it. Damn it. And it would all be very dramatic. And we go, oh, the poor man. He's so lost and upset. But in this choice, and these choices, I think, are fantastic because we see this really heavy, dramatic moment, and then it cuts to this where we see my son is dead. He's gone. You can't do anything about it. I want you to know that. And then we're just into that scene with him and his own son, and just the guilt that he carries with him that he still has a son. And it's a very smart choice, but that's not always going to happen. But as a board artist, they're some of the choices that you can bring into it, into your scenes, even on a production. Again, check with your supervisor. But there are ways like where you might be able to turn a scene on its head to make it play better. And because that might be in a script, that could be a whole there could be a whole chunk of stuff in there in the middle where he goes away, he starts ranting, raving. Then we see him with his son, and we have that moment. And as a board artist, you're like, no, we need to lose that page, that whole page of dialogue where he's ranting and raving. Don't need it. That's not important. We need to see it. We need to kind of be with him in his grief. And that, it's a stronger choice from what's been left out of the story rather than kind of adding to it. There's very rarely times where I think you need to add to a script. It's usually taking stuff away because they're usually way too long. Um, and there's some more in terms of what we leave out. There's this is all about drama scenes and all the rest of it, but in action scenes too. Action scenes are actually probably one of the worst things, the worst headaches that you can have as a board artist because they're usually very poorly written. They're written by people who've never thrown a punch in their lives and who haven't bothered looking up any reference of anything. And uh, they'll just write literally these two characters. They meet in a like in a burned forest, ruined forest, and they fight. And that's the line that you'll get. And then after, goodness knows how many panels of fighting that you have to do, you uh, you then go back into your dramatic beats to tell your story. And that little line, they fight, can really throw everything off. But how you handle the fighting, a lot of it is um, uh, the kind of visual impact, and a lot of especially anime is great for it because there's very little that actually happens in terms of animation a lot of the time. It's usually all done with really sneaky transitions and wipes and stuff like that. And you can go into it because you can make an action scene really expand and get really huge very, very quickly. But like this scene here, I mean, I think this is ridiculously long anyway. I think it's 3.5 minutes almost. But we're not going to watch it all. But there's some really fun moments in it where things like this. That last kick is pretty cool. Um, but you can see like there's not a lot actually going on in terms of animation. It's all done in the cut. And learning how to use cuts so that you can tell your story in those cuts. It's a skill. It takes a long time to develop, but if you really pay attention to the language of these types of scenes, you can you can you can get there. But it's really about what you're leaving out. So one of the things I would say, if you have a fight scene or even a dramatic scene, whatever it is, um, and you've got it boarded out, one of the first things I do is like start cutting it down. Just start cutting out frames until it doesn't make any sense anymore. And that's when you know you've gone too far. Um, and then only keep what is absolutely necessary for it. And then you can figure out ways that you can transition from one moment to the next and keep the continuity. There's a few moments in there where they'll cut wide if they've been tight for a while. They'll cut wide to reestablish the audience, so you know, oh, this is where Ryu is, this is where Ken is, and this is uh, where Bison is. And they'll just keep doing that. And there's a rhythm to it, and it's almost the same as a rhythm for like any kind of scene. Um, they just build and build the tension, and as they build the tension, you get closer and closer to the action. And then when you've confused the audience enough, go wide, reestablish, and then you start that all over again. You start to build the tension, and you just keep building the tension, release the tension, keep building it and releasing it all the time, until you get to that final flurry where Ryu is like, laying in all those kicks and punches there at the end. And like you can see how the punches were just uh, were we got to see the impacts of the punches because this is Ryu really fighting back, and um, they're the moments that are important, because all the other stuff you could have this where he's like throwing punches and the guy's blocking all the slaps and everything else, and it'll look cool, but it's just it's just going to kill the animators. And this is far more exciting to watch. It's far more interesting to watch. Um, and it all depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to focus on the technique, if for some reason that's a part of the story, then fair enough. But most of the time, we're just going for impact, visual impact. So, you know, just take your scene, start pulling stuff out of it. And it doesn't matter what kind of scene it is, because the rhythms are the same. They're always the same. For like dialogue scenes, as the intensity, like you have your establishing shot or your what you call it, you have a master shot, your establishing shot, and your master shot, and then you'll have the dialogue starts. As you start to get into the dialogue deeper, you'll start to put in your intercuts. You'll have those moments where someone is reacting to what somebody says. You do those intercuts as the emotional value of the interaction rises. We get closer and closer and closer to the subject. Once you've hit as high as that's going to go, and uh, the next stage of the conversation is going to start again, you cut wide, you give them a moment, and then you start that rhythm over again. And watch any movie. It's it's the same. It's always the kind of same kind of rhythms, but it's always that kind of thing. Um, there's one last quick one here, is from a show called Kill La Kill. It's totally totally wacky show, um, but the way it handles its fighting scenes is phenomenal. Like, it's great, but you can see how like extreme it is, but it does it brilliantly, because what the characters, all you're trying to show is like the characters trying to defeat each other. Um, the means of that isn't really that interesting. You know, what's more interesting is the over the overall feel of uh, of the the combat, not the combat itself. Um, just crazy. Um, but you can see how much is left out. So if you're reading through your script and you have this altercation, they're like swinging their swords and they're doing all kinds of things. All you have to be concerned about is the impact that it's going to have on the viewer. And you have those moments where it just gets so crazy. It's like, okay, audience needs a break, and then they put in those moments where that like really designed shot with the white background with the two characters kind of leaning back, taking a breath literally, and then kind of going back at it again. But if you look at what's actually happened on screen, all you have are like, these three beats where you have the setup, you have the action, and you have the reaction, and you know that's pretty much it. And that's what pulling frames out of your boards helps you identify, is like identify those important moments and those important beats. And when identifying when the audience needs a rest, identifying whether the dialogue can happen during a heated moment or whether you need a break, depending on how it needs to be delivered and how important it is. If it has that thing where like it needs its moment, then give it its moment. But these are things that you learn over time. Um, and I mean, as a board artist, you're talking about by the time you come in as a junior artist to you're, fully functioning senior board artist, it can be 4 years to get to that point, and then even at that point, you still got a lot of learning to do because, there's so much out there to draw from and to learn. There's a couple of other scenes, but I kind of want to try and get to reviewing some stuff. And but if anyone has any quick questions, and just the last thing here was literally the cut the fat thing, which is read the script, write simple beats, only what you need to see on the board, and then board to that. Review the script. If something was missing, you didn't notice, it wasn't important anyway. Cut till it doesn't make any sense anymore, and then you can start adding some bits and pieces back in. But if you can train yourself to uh, to do that, and you can do it with movies too. Take a movie, take scenes. How much of that can you cut away and have it make sense? And uh, and that's kind of what you're going for, is that kind of economy. And if you can get there, it's very fulfilling as a board artist when you see your animatic cut together and it's like it's doing exactly what you intended it to do, and it has the impact on the people in the room. They're looking at it like that's what you're looking for. But when your boards are falling flat for whatever reason, these are the things that are you need to be focusing on in order to raise them up, to give them those moments, those either it's a more human moment or uh, more humor, you know, building gags into it. Because gags are one of the main things that are never on the page. Like gags are very, very rarely on the page. Um, Sometimes the dialogue will scream a gag at you and there's nothing on the page to support it, but you're like, that's a gag. I have to put a gag there because there's something about the way the character says something or just the dialogue itself, which is like, that's hilarious. And it's even better when you identify that in a scene where it's very striking and it really stands out. And then especially if it's a kind of a scene that's very straight, and then you have that moment where like that's going to be funny, and you're going to hit that beat, crack everybody up, and then let the thing go on because it can be sometimes scenes can get a bit staunch and they get a bit dry, and having those little moments in there where you can identify those moments that you can make funny, that's what's going to really bring your work alive, and it's what's going to get you recognized as a strong board artist when people look at those boards. And like your drawings might be chicken scratch, they might be very, very loose drawings. That doesn't matter if the composition is good, we know who we're looking at, and uh, and it tells a story clearly. That's pretty much all you need. I mean, other artists, depending if stuff is going overseas, they usually need something to be pretty clean. But if it's just staying within the studio, you can get pretty rough with it. And that's when you want to go for more footage rather than cleanliness, really push the acting and sacrifice the cleanliness, because nobody is really impressed by pretty drawings on a storyboard. Most of the time, you'll get sighs of people going, "Oh my God, why did you put so much time into that?" It's good, and because every single drawing you do is disposable or potentially disposable. So, um, if only if you know like that's not going anywhere, might want to put a bit more time into something if it's going to give a certain amount of impact. But if it's not, it's just part of the, getting from A to B. Don't kill yourself trying to do super pretty drawings. Just keep the drawing simple. As long as we know who we're looking at, we're good to go. And in your roughs, you can even just don't even worry about like necessarily like you can sometimes just identify the character just with the initial of the character on them in your roughs so that you know who's who, and you can blast through things pretty quickly that way. But don't get caught up in the drawing. Like it's just the last thing you need to do. You're not an illustrator, right? You're telling stories first and foremost, and the story is the most important part. Doing super pretty drawings, it doesn't matter. It really, really doesn't matter. Just focus on the story and bring those beats out. So I would encourage you to, you know, there's some great books out there about story structure and that are worth reading. Um, and maybe what I'll do is I'll put a small bibliography together, and I'll give that to Lindsay, and we can maybe post it up on a thing so you can have a look at some books that are pretty good. But they'll mention movies. Sit down with the movies that they're mentioned in the book as well, so you can see where they're going about the structure. But it's the only way to learn this stuff is to watch tons and tons of movies, see how the director is putting things together, see how the story is structured, how the characters are behaving. Like, well, one last thing I'll say about characters, like for instance, in if you have a cast of characters, um, one character is the lead character, and all the other characters are supporting characters, and they usually the role that they inhabit is they're like the internal voice of our main character. They're able to say things that the character can't say themselves because it'll come out as sounding expository or just like why is that character speaking to themselves? Like we don't do soliloquy in film. Uh, so there's a really good scene to watch for that very thing in Bridesmaids where here's again Kristen Wiig and Melissa McCarthy. She comes over to the house and Kristen Wiig is kind of beating herself up, and Miss McCarthy's character is kind of giving her a hard time. But if you listen to the dialogue and listen to what she's saying, it's Kristen Wiig's internal monologue. She's telling it to us because the character can't do it themselves. We can't see inside their mind, but we can do it with another character, and that's often what our characters will do. So that's another great way of like if you have dialogue, sometimes I'll end up switching lines of dialogue with characters because yeah, if that character says that, it weakens the interaction between them. So this character should say that, and you can flip things on their heads. Or you can use, like I said, use that character to bring something out. So if a character is trying to do something or achieve something and they're frustrated, you can have someone come into the scene and give voice to that frustration in whatever way, you know, it makes sense to do it. And not only will that reveal more about um, the relationship of the two characters, but also give us more depth to the story and uh, more, again, just more character, essentially. I'm just repeating myself.
Okay, I'm gonna cut in. No, this is excellent. I've learned a lot. I don't know if I'm sure everybody else has. We definitely have a question
Yep.
in the chat, and if anybody else wants to ask a question, feel free to throw it in the chat. If it goes to John, the presenter, it's totally fine. If you want to throw it to me, the organizer, that'd be excellent. If it goes to everyone, fantastic. But we do have one. We have a couple comments too, but we'll go through the question first. Should you suggest the change to the director before drawing? How would you improve the scene to avoid wasting time on a new idea not in the script?
Yeah,
So at what
exactly.
point should you raise the flag to the director to make a change like that?
Right away. Usually what will happen is when you're having the script handoff for a show or whatever, you'll be in the room with the supervisor, the director, and the clients will usually be there too, the producers on the client side, whatever, or a director, a supervising director. And as you're going through the script, ideas will come to you. And don't ever feel that because, oh, I'm new, I'm like, I'm green, I'm just out of school, whatever. I don't have anything to offer this conversation. That's nonsense. You do. You might see something that whoever else in the room just doesn't see. So don't be shy. And if you have something to bring to the table, bring it because it's important. But clear it with your supervisor or your director. Um, usually clearing it with your supervisor is enough. Because then your supervisor will go off and take care with that conversation with the director, and you can just go ahead and do what you need to do. Usually, because the supervisor is one of the jobs of the supervisor is to understand what it is the director is looking for, and then to get that out of you as the board team. So when a supervisor is giving you direction, it's take that as being the voice of the director or the supervising director. It's not generally our opinion because there's things you'll do on shows that like I don't agree with it. I don't think it's a great way to do it, but I don't have a choice because this is what they want and they're dead set on it. So uh, that's not a fight worth kind of taking because it's not going to go anywhere. But um, when because the supervisor and the director will know more about the flexibility of the client. So if you say something, if it makes it better, you're like, yes, if it makes it better, do it. Like, but yeah, you do it, just do it straight away. As soon as you get the idea, just go straight to your supervisor and yeah, tell them what you want to do.
And I guess that would definitely come with an approval, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
From the supervisor, from the director? Yeah. Okay. Do you actually know how much input or change can happen in an anime script? Just out of curiosity. That was one of the comments that was kind of
In
left.
an anime script, um,
Yeah, it's
well,
not quite, it wasn't quite phrased as a question, but I'm
yeah,
asking it as a question if you might know.
my understanding of it, from what I know and talking to people who have worked on anime shows, is that like they are really like insanely like tightly tightly boarded. Like everything is boarded pretty tightly, and the scripts are usually pretty tight as well because the directors are usually the creators of the show as well, and they know everything about this world, and they've put in so much thought into it that usually what they give you is what they want. Western shows tend to be a bit more wishy-washy. We don't generally have that kind of really tight vision because a lot of the shows we do are actually just advertisements for toys, to be honest about it. It's like, and so we don't generally have the same kind of locked scripts. But I have heard like of an animator taking a scene and looking at it, and as long as they're plussing it, as long as they're giving something to it, it's never frowned upon. It's always like if you want to give it something more, then they'll go with that. But there's also less flexibility in anime scripts because of the amount of exposition. Um, the way it's kind of hard to describe. It's like there's sometimes if you were to start jiggling around like events, it may not fall quite as well because of how the exposition has been spoken, and it would mean a lot more work than it would be in a Western script where we can sometimes take an entire scene, and like chuck it, and it makes no difference at all to the narrative. We're not missing anything. But anime tends to be a lot tighter like that. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's it for questions. If we can just take a quick minute break.
Storyboarding, I mean, you're going to be getting a lot of information from other board artists and stuff like that, but it's like storyboarding, honestly, I think if if it was taught in animation schools properly, it would be a 3-year course. Like there's so much involved in it to kind of like really kind of get your feet under you so you really understand what you're doing and how to do the best jobs you possibly can. But there's the when I first started in boarding, you couldn't even look at a storyboard until you had 4 years of animation experience. It was like you just weren't allowed. You could not come out of school and go into a storyboard job. It'd be like, no. It's like even if you're really good at drawing, to be like, no, you got to get some animation experience under your belt first, and then you can start storyboarding. And one of the biggest issues that I've encountered over the years from I mean, the number of people that we hire directly out of school is comparatively low um, for storyboards compared to people who have a little bit of experience, even if they've been like, doing cleanup or revisions or something for a year. Um, the A lot of the times the experience is what we kind of need. But every once in a while, I'll see a storyboard from a student that's like, yeah, they know what they're doing. Often what will happen is they understand how to do it, but they don't have the language to support what they're doing. I know, and it takes years almost sometimes for them to develop the ability to communicate what it is that's in their head that allows them to do what they do. Um, and that's where a lot of that kind of time and effort kind of comes in there. But uh, if you do get hired out of school to do a storyboard job, just be aware you will do more drawing on your first board than you did in your entire schooling life, probably. Because if you have one board, if you're doing an 11-minute board, you're talking about, depending on the type of show, but you can have up to 1,200 panels for that episode. So that's 1,200 panels. But that doesn't include the panels that you threw away. It doesn't include the 12 times you tried to draw that one panel that just didn't work. It doesn't include the revisions and all the other stuff that you have to pile on top of it. So you're talking like, you're doing thousands and thousands of drawings for every storyboard that you do. Actually, I think I told you, Lindsay, I did the math on trying to figure out how
No,
many drawings.
I was just going to interrupt you and say this is your next talk. Like next time we have you on, we're going to be running numbers because this
Okay.
is my favorite thing. Ayla, you would get a kick out of this. We
So
can
I,
make
I was just curious one night. I was like, I wonder how many drawings I've done in my professional career. But I had decided I'd include sketches that I do when I'm sitting at home at night and I'm like, in front of TV and I'm drawing. And I think I was pretty conservative with the numbers I came with, but with all the shows I was on, I kind of knew generally the panel count and everything I was doing. And I came out with, in the last 20 years or so, I've done about 2.5 million drawings. Like, and that's a pretty conservative estimate. And it's like, but that's just, that's how much you're drawing all the time. So keep this thing. So I was actually, I was on,
we're gonna go there. We're gonna
yeah,
go risk
okay,
health, drawing health,
yeah,
the numbers, the data, the
yeah,
speed, and everything.
yeah. But yeah, if anyone has any other follow-up questions, whatever, feel free to put them in the on the Discord, and I'll get to them as soon as I can when I see them. And if you want any kind of like specific one-on-one feedback, uh, feel free to reach out to Lindsay for a contact. And
We'll
I
set that
can't,
up.
yeah, I can't promise I'll have the time all the time to kind of look at people's stuff, but I'll do my best. If something comes my way, I'll do my best to take a look at it and send some notes back.
I think the best way too is just to throw it on the Discord and tag you as an
Yeah,
update. And that would probably be
mhm.
that cut me out as the middle
Sure,
person.
sure, yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
and then
But
you get that you know right away and you can look whenever you want.
yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Thank you, everybody, for putting up with my blathering for the last 2.5 hours or so.
No, thank you so
Um,
much.
yeah,
That was
thank you for having
very
me.
These are hard concepts too. This is really an advanced topic. In my opinion, I think this is a pretty the tough one that you
Well,
covered today.
well, I wouldn't call them advanced topics. The way uh, the way to look at this is these are the skills that a board artist uses every single day to the point where we're not even thinking about it anymore. Like,
Yeah,
and that's where you have to get with these skills is that you have to
we take it
get them
for
into your
granted.
toolbox and just be able to use them without thinking about it. So, and
We
it's
internalize
only when
them.
you get to that point are you going to be comfortable doing a sort of like, I don't think I can be put into an environment, and I don't say, I'm not trying to brag, I'm just like, it's just an experience thing where I don't, you get to a point where you can't be put into an environment where you won't know what to do. Like you will just instinctively know how to treat certain things. And obviously you can always learn more, but yeah, there you go. But thanks everybody. Appreciate you being here, and thank you for submitting your work. And everyone, be well. Take care of
Have a good
yourselves.
night. Thanks again, John. We can't wait to have you
Okay.
back. Have a good night, everybody.
Okay. Take care. Bye.